To winnow, you pick up your container and you put it about shoulder height and then empty it from that container into a container on the ground, perhaps on a tarp. And a lot of folks have the instinct to kind of shake that bin to empty it out, but you should try just like tilting it and let the material flow down. Because if you shake it, you're creating a lot of variable speed and there'll be clumps that kind of come in. And the more variability, the harder it is to control the actual winnowing. The more regular you can make it, the easier it is to get something reliable. Welcome to episode 76 of the Seed Farmer Podcast. The podcast where I want you to harvest seeds from some of the vegetables and flowers growing in your farm or garden, and then to plant that seed out to grow delicious vegetables and beautiful flowers. If you enjoy the Seed Farmer Podcast and find it to be a good resource that helps you improve your seed work and farming, please support the show at spreadsheet.farm/supportpodcast. I'm your host, Dan Brisebois, seed grower at Tourne-Sol Cooperative Farm and author of The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seeds. Today's minisode is about cleaning seeds. But first, some news. So we've passed the date, but July 9th was the date when I took over the Seed Farmer Podcast from No-Till Growers. Or when I say take over, I mean, I was doing the interviews and stuff, but prior to that, they were doing all the post-production and publishing. So July 9th is when I relaunched the podcast under, I guess, my own management, if you want to call it that way. So it's been a year of that, and which is really awesome to see, and it's really fun. I couldn't have done it without my sister Molly, who does so much of does all the post-production, and that really helps out. And I appreciate everyone who supports the podcast in any way that they do, be it financially or also be it with 5-star reviews, telling your friends about it. I love getting your questions. I love getting your comments, hearing what you like about the episodes. And speaking of questions, I got a question from a listener named Mike. He wrote to me that they were growing a carrot seed crop with a couple hundred plants in it, and that they noticed that there were 2 Daucus volunteers flowering. So like a flowering carrot species that's used for cut flower. And so they had 2 of those nearby that was flowering at the same time. And he asked, how terrible is this for a seed crop? So here are some of my thoughts. And one thing is, a grow out is the best way to get an idea of what actually happened if you have crossing. So growing that seed out, if you harvest it now and you're able to grow it for a fall crop, or if you only grow it next season, and if you're able to grow a few thousand or more carrots from that, it's easy to grow 1,000 carrots in a small area. Whereas if it was the zucchini plants, it's a big deal. But a grow out will give you an idea what's going on. That being said, 2 plants in a population of over 200 is less than 1% of the population. I think that pulling those plants is probably going to be good enough for the genetics. Now, if this is a seed contract, and this is your situation, definitely ask the company who contracted you what they think about it. That's very important. But if this is seed for your own use, if it's for your own farm use, I would definitely not worry about that. And this is what I always say. If you see some crossing that you don't like, don't keep those carrots for seed next the following year. And if you see some crossing that you do like, you could keep it. In the specific case of a carrot for a cut flower versus a carrot for a root, you're probably not going to see things that you're loving at the root stage. So it's probably more a matter of culling. But it's probably not going to be a big deal if this is for your own use. And if you were putting the seed in seed packs, I would probably feel comfortable, so small seed packs for home gardeners, I'd probably feel comfortable selling the seed, but still wanting to grow it out to see what it's like. Now, those are just some thoughts that have come through reflecting on that question, and it's a decision that you need to make, I guess, ultimately what you're going to do. But 1% is not as big a deal as if you suddenly found that you had a population almost the same size, or even like 50 or 60 plants just next to your grow out. So that's a question. One last piece of news is just what's going on at the farm right now. This morning, I harvested a radish seed crop. And this, in recent episodes, I was talking about when is it time to harvest. And this specific radish seed crop was interesting. This is an overwintered winter radish. So it's a winter radish that we harvested last fall, overwintered, planted in the spring. And we grew it on bare soil. And the weeds were a persistent problem here. We weren't able to really keep the in-row weeds under control, and the hairy Galansoga just kept getting ahead of us. And about 2.5 weeks ago, I realized that we were spending too much time weeding this crop, and that I didn't want to keep dedicating that energy. Definitely makes the crop budget not pencil out as well as it should. Maybe that's a little promo for the Profitable Farmer book that Julia Shanks and I are releasing this fall, where we're going to be getting into crop budgets. But if you take too much time growing a crop, cleaning a crop, weeding and all that, you eat up all your profits. And I was a little bit worried in the case of the radishes that we're just spending too much time. And then also it's time that we didn't have to be weeding, because it's time we could be spending weeding other crops. And I made a decision about 3 weeks ago that we wouldn't weed this crop anymore, and that we'd harvest it, I guess, now. And I thought it'd be a little bit more mature than it was. So this morning, the plants are greener than I like, but that bed was getting out of control, and so we pulled all the plants out. They're lying on tarps on our nursery benches in our nursery greenhouse, and they will keep maturing over the coming weeks. Probably within the next 2 weeks, they'll be really dried down and crisp. At that point, I'll be able to thresh them and see how much seed we get. We'll definitely get some seed. It probably won't be as good as if I could have left the crop in the ground another week, but maybe it'll be almost as good. I'm not sure. The greenness was making me feel uncomfortable when I was pulling them this morning. So that's just a story of how to decide when it's time to pull something. And I've grown a lot of radish seed crops, and still I'm having to make some calls that I'm not totally sure about. The plants were nice, though, and that's really great. Just not as dry as I'd like. And now, let's get into today's minisode topic. When I was planning out this topic, I was thinking of it in terms of field cleaning and kind of wanted to get into that first stage of cleaning that you do for a seed crop. But as I've been thinking about it, I realized that maybe field cleaning is the wrong term because not all of it really happens in the field, and I'll just call it maybe your first cleaning. And this really applies to crops that you may have harvested whole, such as these radishes I just mentioned, and that are dried down, finished after ripening, and are ready for threshing and are taking up a lot of place. So that first cleaning has kind of two objectives. One is obviously to get the seed out of the plant, and part of that, what's nice about getting the seed out of the plant, you need that seed ultimately. Maybe there's three objectives. I said two, but maybe there's three objectives. So one is getting the seed out of the plant. Another is having plants that are laid out means they're vulnerable to the world. They can get water on them. You could get a rabbit or birds or some kind of critter in that might eat some of it. I'm not sure if a rabbit wants radish plants or not, but they're vulnerable to an unfortunate circumstance. So once you can extract the seed out of it and get it into a tub or a bin, then you have a lot more control protecting it. So that's the second objective. First objective is just getting the seed. Second is getting it to a place where you can protect it. And the third objective is just managing space, because you probably have a finite amount of area that you can cure or let dry down seed crops, and it just fills up. And if you don't clean that seed, suddenly you don't have space for the next seed crop. So that's the goal of this first cleaning, is to quickly get seed out of the plant into a protected area and liberate space for other seed crops. And with that in mind, you don't have to get the seed perfectly clean. If you can get it perfectly clean, that's phenomenal. But that's not the purpose here. The purpose is really reducing the volume and getting it out of the field or out of your nursery into your dry areas. Now, There's basically 3 steps to do that. The first will be threshing. Then you're going to screen it to take out some of the big bits, and then winnow it to blow out some of the light stuff. Essentially what you do with seed cleaning. And we'll just walk through those steps. So let's start off with threshing. Now, you might have a thresher, and in that case, you could run your seeds through it. But not every seed crop needs to be threshed using a machine. Most seed crops can actually be threshed without a machine, and the machine just makes it faster. So doing it by hand or by boot or with a stick might take a little bit longer, but it is feasible. And that's often the way that I'll start off. So to thresh, basically, you got your seeds, your plants on a tarp. You need to make sure they're dry. That's one thing that's really important, is the drier the plant, the easier it is to thresh. Now, there actually is some crops, if they're too dry, the stems can shatter and be the same size as the seeds and be a pain to clean out. Stuff like carrots, for example, the umbel crops, sometimes with lettuce too, if you're threshing whole plants. So maybe there is such thing as too dry. But when you're new to seed crops, usually you're not at too dry. You're trying to do it a little too early. So for now, don't worry about too dry. You want the crop to be dry. You want it to be crisp. You want it to shatter when you step on it, the pods to pop open, the seed to fall out. And then you stomp on those plants or you hit them with a stick and you get the seed separated. And what you wind up with, and this is where that first cleaning begins, is what you wind up with is you're going to have shattered seed on your tarp with chaff and dust and little bits of sticks. But you'll also have big plants with the shattered pods, with no more pods left on them. And so you need to break this down to a smaller area, the smaller volume. And the first thing to do would be to go and grab the big plants and shake them a little bit. And then what I do is I have a tractor and wagon close by, and I just throw these big plants into the wagon. And they're going to head off to the compost pile at the end of the day. And so just take them by hand, shake a little bit, and then throw them into the wagon. And that leaves me with the chaff and pods and seeds. And if it's depending how many plants it is, if it's a smaller amount, I can maybe just empty this whole tarp into a bin. If I have multiple tarps like this, what I might do is, now the seed is going to be probably the heaviest thing, and it's going to have probably settled to the bottom. I might just kind of take scoops of empty pods off and just toss them into a bin and then toss them into the back of the wagon. I kind of want to just remove it quickly to get to a smaller volume of stuff that has seed in it. So I'm going to empty this all, what's left, that seed, the dirt, the remaining pods, into a bin, and that's when it gets to the first screening. And we have screens that are made out of hardware cloth. So hardware cloth you can buy from almost any hardware store, and it's usually available on rolls on the back, beside where they'd have like window screen or other kinds of things on rolls. And you can get hardware cloth in different mesh size, some that's 1/4 inch, some that's 1/2 inch, some that's bigger than that, but 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch are probably the most useful. So you can buy pieces of hardware cloth and then make a frame for it out of 1x2s. You can pinch it between 2 sets of 1x2s to have a skinny screen, or you could have one side be 1x2s, make kind of a rectangle with the 1x2s, and then staple the hardware cloth onto it, and then build up the top with 1x4s to make an actual box, like vertical 1x4s to make a box where you can kind of just pile up that seed stuff in there. And then you want the screen to be roughly the size of the bin that you're working over. If it's bigger, the seed's going to fall outside of it. If it's smaller, that's okay. If it's the same size about, you can kind of actually grab the bin and the screen together. That's going to work out well. And so grab a 1/2 inch or so. So you grab your 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch screen and throw in the stuff and then shake it side by side. And the seeds are going to fall through. And a lot of the pods and bigger bits are going to stay at the top. Now, just because of the volume you probably have at this point, there's going to be larger pieces that come through too. But it's going to reduce, the volume is probably going to reduce by 3/4 at this point, at least half. And you're going to wind up with a bin. And at this point, the bin that you wind up with, you'll be able to see a lot of seed in that stuff that's in it, in that chaff. Now here, is a time that you could do a quick winnow. If you're outdoors, you could just pour from one bin to another, facing the wind to let the wind winnow out the chaff. You should probably do this on a piece of landscape fabric. I all too often don't, but you should probably do it on a piece of landscape fabric in case you have an unexpected gust. And this is something here will vary based on where you are or your specific site, how the wind is. Do you have a fairly steady wind that's always in the same direction, or do you have kind of gusts that kind of go all over the place and that, the wind is changing direction every minute or two? And also, depending on how strong that wind is. If you're winnowing beans or peas, it's not that big a deal to have a stronger wind, but the smaller the seed, the more frustrating a variable wind is or a too strong wind is. Now, you can always set up a couple fans and winnow the seed in front of that. And to winnow, you pick up your container and you put it about shoulder height and then empty it from that container into a container on the ground, perhaps on a tarp. And a lot of folks have the instinct to kind of shake that bin to empty it out, but you should try just like tilting it and let the material flow down. Because if you shake it, you're creating a lot of variable speed and there'll be clumps that kind of come in. And the more variability, the harder it is to control the actual winnowing. The more regular you can make it, the easier it is to get something reliable. Now this is, if you're in an area where there's gusts coming and going, there's some variability there. If you put it in front of a box fan, that's going to be reliable in speed. And then if you're pouring in a reliable way, in a consistent way, then that's also going to give you a little bit more reliability in your results. So you do a quick screening with a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch piece of hardware cloth, and then you do a quick winnow, and just those 2 steps is going to reduce the volume of material a lot. Now, if you're only working with 1 or 2 seed lots in that day, you can do a little bit more work. After winnowing it, you can run it through a smaller screen and maybe even winnow it again. And probably by that time, it might be pretty clean. If you are dealing with either, let's say a dozen seed lots in a day, or maybe there's some really big seed lots, you might not have the time to get it to that point. And that's fine, because just getting it into a smaller container and getting it out of the elements will get you the results you're looking for, which is more space and protected seed. And then later in the fall, you can go and do a final cleaning for this seed, where you'll essentially use the same techniques of screening and winnowing, maybe a winnow wizard if you have one, to get stuff even more clean and ready for seed packs, or to send it to a seed company, or just to store it for your own use. Now, on our farm, once we've finished the first cleaning, this field cleaning, then I'll have seeds in a container, and it might be, a full-size Rubbermaid bin or other kind of bin. It may also be a smaller container, even like a yogurt container or ice cream container, depending on the volume of seed I have. And I will always label it. I have a lot of empty seed envelopes. I'll label 2 of them with the crop name, the date that I cleaned it, and maybe the lot number or the SKU, if that's information that's easily on hand. And I'll take a clothespin and clip that on the outside of the bin so it's easy to see. And then I'll also throw one inside the bin so I have a double verification system. And then what I'll do is I take these bins and I bring them into our seed house. We have a seed cleaning room in the warehouse, and I'll put these bins on either a shelf or else on pallets on the ground, and I leave them open. And I leave them open so that any remaining moisture in there keeps evaporating, keeps being emptied out. I have had a couple seed lots where I clean them up, they look perfect, and I pack them up into containers that are airtight too early, and then a couple weeks later opened it and realized that there was some moisture and there's starting to be moldy spots or pockets in the seed bin. And so I just give seed a long time to breathe and dry out before I pack it out. This stresses Emily out that we might have 20 or 30 bins, sometimes more, of open seed. And I think she can imagine all the dangers that might happen. It doesn't worry me as much. Maybe it should, but I make sure not to winnow right beside it or do any other seed cleaning beside it. It's definitely important to be careful with these open seed bins, but leaving them open lets them breathe and it'll be better for the storage later. We also have a forced air dryer, which is basically like a cupboard made out of plywood, and it has an air on the top that kind of sucks air through. There's no added heat, just sucks air through, and there are shelves with window screens, and we can put the seed directly on those screens or in mesh bags on the screens, but I'll usually reserve that for more peppers or tomatoes or seeds like that might come out moist and that I want to dry quicker. If we had a lot more of these kind of cupboards, I'd probably put more seed into them as opposed to having these empty bins. Once the seed is in the warehouse, I can ignore it for quite a bit at that point. After a couple weeks, I will put a cover on it to make sure that nothing happens about it. And then by September or October, we'll do a final cleaning to get the rest of the bits out and get it ready for germ tests and then packing. But at this time of year, I'm just trying to get the seed crops reduced in volume to make room for other seed crops to come in. And especially August, there's a lot of seed coming in. So the quicker I can turn over my drying space, the better. Now, at this part of the podcast, I invite you to head out on a seedy day to go and stomp on your dry seed plants and get them into an appropriately sized bin that's well labeled. So go out and do some cleaning. And that's another minisode of the Seed Farmer Podcast. I'd love to hear about your seed cleaning questions, challenges, successes. Feel free to email me or DM me. Thank you to Sophia Sidalton for the theme music. You can hear more of their music at sophiasidalton.com. Thank you to Molly Brisebois for editing this episode and getting us through the first year of the Seed Farmer Podcast. And thank you so much for listening. You can find more seed growing resources on my blog at seedgrowers.farm. While you're there, you can subscribe to my newsletter full of seed growing, crop planning, and farm spreadsheets. You can also find out where to order a copy of my book, The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seed. And you can support the podcast at spreadsheet.farm/supportpodcast or follow the link in the show notes. If you haven't already subscribed, now's the time. You wouldn't want to miss the next episode. Until then, happy farming.